feedback today we'll be listening to and be able to take away and look to respond in the meantime. So just in a moment, we're going to get a presentation up. So as Anne said, we'll run through 10-15 minutes presentation and then look to really have the kōrero, I guess, around the Mount Spatial Plan and any feedback on that and the program being proposed, and the second part of that kōrero specifically around the Mount Industrial Planning Study and any feedback on the direction that's traversing the program being proposed, and the second part of that kōrero specifically around the Mount Industrial Planning Study and any feedback on the direction that's traversing the program being proposed, and the second part of that kōrero specifically around the Mount Industrial Planning Study and any feedback on the direction that's traversing the program being proposed, and the second part of that kōrero around
Yep, you're good to go.
Should I keep talking or hold
Yep.
for a moment?
No, go for it. I'm just about to bring your presentation up.
All right. So we'll just a note also, we've got Ruben Fraser in the room as well from Bay of Plenty Regional Council, should any questions come up in that regard. So if you could flick to the next slide, please. So look, just brief overview. Mount Arataki Spatial Plan, so just got that wider area there, as you're all well aware by now, runs from the Mount down to the Arataki area, but it also effectively includes the Mount Industrial Planning Study area, the industrial area, and also Whareroa Marae. The spatial plan will deliver a 30-year blueprint for the future, but really what is critical is what are we going to do over the next 10 years to achieve that longer term vision, and that informs both our policy changes, so our city plan program and so forth, and our long-term planning, so it's our funding for capital projects. The industrial planning study is a more in-depth look, responding to the key issues within that area and making recommendations on the future policy and land use within that area. So David will talk to that further shortly. Next slide, please. So just in terms of timelines, we're now in the sort of the final quarter of this project. So really just touching briefly, the top line there is our ongoing mahi with hapu and iwi. So we have set up a specific, I guess, a mana whenua work stream in terms of our engagement with mana whenua as partners, and that's occurred all the way through the process to date, and will continue through to delivery of the project and beyond. The lower line there is just the key milestones along the project timeline. So we did set up a reference group to identify key issues, moved into following analysis, moved into stakeholder and community engagement, and then, as we've reported previously, undertook design sprint workshops with involving mana whenua, subject matter experts, and our other key stakeholders such as Waka Kotahi and so forth. And as you're aware, we've also just come out of community engagement, which ran from early September to early October. And the focus of that engagement was around receiving feedback on proposed interventions for the Mount's spatial plan. A key point here is also that the Mount Industrial Planning Study has been running to the same timeframes, undertaking engagement along the same timeline, including with key stakeholders and mana whenua. And again, David will talk to that a little bit more detail shortly. So, as I said, we're looking to report up to the committee on the 4th of December. That is to get a general endorsement of the program that's been taken forward, and then we'll bring you the glossy, nice version of the spatial plan early next year for final endorsement. Next slide, please. I've sort of touched on this. So, engagement with mana whenua is ongoing, and through specific wānanga through the course of the process, as well as their involvement in all of our reference group and design sprint and so forth. Engagement with key stakeholders has been ongoing. Sorry, spelling mistake there. Community engagement. Stakeholder workshops for MSP and the Mount Industrial Planning Study. So, as well as that general engagement, we've been bringing together key stakeholders throughout the process to get into the room and look at the various options and provide their feedback. And we've also been, particularly more recently, and coming out of some of those stakeholder workshops, being undertaking direct engagement with some of the businesses who have, I guess, raised concerns around some of the direction that we're heading. So, engagement outcomes, and this is, next slide, please. This is, I guess, we've used our engagement alongside our technical inputs and alongside the inputs from mana whenua and our key stakeholders to assist with prioritisation of our program. So, there's been very strong support for improving air quality and environmental outcomes. That's been pretty consistent since day one, and it is something the community is talking about. Strong support for continued coastal path, which has been interesting because I guess people obviously like, what's been done recently, and they want to see that type of amenity continue. That comes through very strongly. Reduction in crime, and an increase in safety, in particular around Bayfair and Arataki. Safe access to the beach, particularly in the Arataki area. So, I guess I'm pulling out some of the areas which are floating the top, we're getting the most responses from, and that we feel we need to respond to in our program. Support for safer roads, cycleways, more public amenities. There's a bit of back to basics here. Just get the fundamentals, fix the potholes, give us some shade in our parks, get the rubbish bins working. That does come through quite strongly in this engagement. Better parking. We didn't get a lot of opposition to anything, but do note that there was limited support and some opposition to the intensification. So, we obviously had Plan Change 33 running at the same time, and people quite involved in that, including leaflet drops and so forth. So, that did come through our channels as well.
So, you're just noting there you've got, but not paid parking. In any of those discussions, did you touch on who pays for the parking? By a targeted rate or something? Are they thinking of that? Did you ask the question?
Probably not that particular question. When we engage, and particularly face to face, we do look to open up a conversation to try to help people explain why we're looking at parking management and the reasons and so forth. Certainly, we do talk about, that parking isn't free per se. But look, probably the alternatives didn't really come up. We do find people, they're pretty clear on their view. They understand the need to manage it, but they don't want to see paid. I can probably give you more of the reasons why they don't want to see paid. They want that access to the coastline, they being locals and so forth. Businesses don't want to see, the clientele driven away and so forth. Just a couple more slides from myself. Next one, please. I won't go into too much detail here. I think just in terms of outcomes sought, improved mood, these were the initial outcomes that were put together by the Mount Spatial Plan Reference Group. So improved movement network, better managed natural hazards, enhanced sense of community and environment. I think really what we wanted to show here is we've also been working with Waka Kotahi so that these outcomes sought align well with their own transport outcomes, but also with our wider, our direction, our TCC strategic framework. And so there's good alignment there. And when we have assessed the actions put forward, we've effectively taken it through this framework to make sure that what we're putting forward, what we're proposing we invest in, aligns with the outcomes we seek as a council and what our partners are also seeking.
This is the Mount Spatial Plan only.
Yes, the actions that are the industrial planning study actions effectively sit as a subset to the Mount Spatial Plan. So you'll see within the attachment we've attachment C, they're all captioned in one place. So we have assessed those actions as well as part of the overall Mount Spatial Plan in terms of
because it's just that the outcomes sought don't include any sort of economic. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, no,
is that just the spatial plan, and does the industrial sector sit outside that, because that's an important key part that we have an effective economic activity base.
Yes.
Sorry, it's probably just a typo in there because the doubled up on the improved movement network, where you kind of think across it probably should relate to some economic outcome.
Yeah, I think you have on that second row there.
Yeah, the second row.
Yeah. But then we've got a city that's easy to move around in.
Well, I take the point in terms of the economic outcomes. I think David can talk to that because we are cognizant of the business's relationship to the port and so forth. Just last slide. I won't get into too much detail here. I guess when we break from the presentation, we are looking to step through and gain feedback on the program itself, either, I guess the timing and so forth of what's been proposed or some of the detail. This slide really is just to give you an understanding of how we've approached that program. We considered, and this is very similar to the Automaitai Spatial Plan and the Te Papa, so we've taken into account the feedback from those. Consideration of partners, where it's been delivered, consideration of mana whenua priorities. So we've identified specifically what they have identified as their priorities, as opposed to assessing it per se. Cost range, whether it's funded, partially funded, or could be externally funded, or is unfunded. And then as it says there, really looking for that feedback on timing, priority, funding priorities, and any gaps and so forth. But because these two projects are so interlinked, we thought we'll run with David's slides. So next slide, and then come back for the feedback in 5-10 minutes.
Kia ora tātou. Ko David Sackley toko ingoa. So hopefully everyone's seen me around the traps before. So Te Maheri Aho Mahi o Moao is intended to be the output of the Mount Industrial Planning Study. Just next slide, please. So we've identified several months ago the key challenges that are up here on the screen. So 8 key challenges. One of those is the fact that the land is economically so valuable. Its proximity to the port is the reason why most of the businesses have chosen to locate there. Land price wise, some of that land is 3 times what you'd expect to see in places like Tauranga and elsewhere. So businesses aren't choosing to go there because it's cheap land. They're going there because of the access to the port and the central location. We're also recognising that we have a constrained transport network, and that's what Connecting Mount Maunganui is working on. The indicative business case has now been moved out to April in terms of when that will go up to the Waka Kotahi board. And I guess some of that alignment, we want to make sure that that preferred option is carried through and seen into the industrial plan and also into the Mount Arataki spatial plan. And then obviously the pressures of growth. So not only the air quality impacts, but some of the other impacts as we start to see the growth in containers, for example, the growth in traffic and transport movements within the industrial area, as well as climate change and how that might influence and change land uses going forward. Next slide.
Well, just before you go off that, so again, I come back to my comments earlier on, that what I didn't see in here, because one of the key challenges is that this area in itself is not just important to Tauranga, but it is actually important to the whole of New Zealand. And so that is a big challenge for us, because we're not just able to make decisions about us. We have to take into account, we have New Zealand's largest export port in the middle of that industry. So that's what I didn't see there.
And I think when you see the final plan and certainly the report to the 4th, that will come through more strongly. I think one of the questions that we raised is what are the issues that the industrial plan is trying to tackle? So originally it was looking at what's the appropriate zoning, have we got enough industrial land, where could some of these heavy industries relocate to? I think some of that conversation has changed as a result of the feedback and engagement with the community, with mana whenua and with businesses. So just next slide, please. So what we've heard to date, this is really kind of summarising it into 3 or 4 bullet points. There's a lot more to this than just what you see up there. So mana whenua, in particular Ngāti Kuku and those that are living at Whareroa, have voiced that ongoing concern, that ongoing challenge with living in the industrial area and the effects that has on them. And that's not just air quality, that is noise, that is amenity, that is their mental health as well. So that priority area that was identified around Whareroa was identified a couple of years ago. We've carried that forward and we've put that up when we've talked about options for land use change or options for the status quo. In terms of the community, again, air quality concerns coming through very highly, but as Carl touched on, also the importance of the area as a key transport area. And so residents that live at the Mount Omanu and Arataki are concerned about, well, how do they get to work? How do they get to the CBD? How do they get to childcare, kohanga and other facilities? And then the businesses, again, the transport, everyone's, I think, in agreement with that. But those locational requirements and the message that the businesses have given is about it. It's about coexistence for them. So they want to coexist with the community. They strongly feel that they're not going anywhere. They don't want to be forced to go anywhere, but they recognise that there's things that they could do that would improve the environment, improve some of those issues. So just next slide, touch on that. So what we've heard from industry, they have asked us very strongly to recognise that they have been there for a number of years. So in the situation of balance established in 1951, some of the other industries have been there for decades as well. They don't have somewhere else to go to. And in fact, I think the question came up this morning in terms of the work that's been done through smart growth, looking at future industrial areas. There isn't really anywhere for heavy industry to go. It's not wanted at Rangiuru. Originally, Rangiuru was going to be the place for some of those heavy industries to relocate to and I guess be the equivalent of the Ruakura or the Metro Port in South Auckland. That's not looking like that would be the case. And any other sites have their own environmental and other issues. So through the future development strategy, smart growth has identified a number of areas that potentially may be suitable for industrial. And a couple of those would also be suitable for heavy industry in terms of the soil and geotechnical conditions. But equally, again, they have the challenges of, are you then just relocating a problem elsewhere? And primarily it would be in the Western Bay of Plenty district. We have to be cognizant of marae in a number of these locations, Māori land, as well as existing populations that are within those locations. We'll just go on to the next slide because I think there's a number of conversations around this, but we have engaged, particularly over the last couple of months, with industry groups. So we've met individually with Balance and with Laughter and Waste Management. Those conversations have been at an executive level, bringing along Christine Jones and Sarah Munsden. And we've also more recently engaged with a group that Priority One have set up of the key businesses in the industrial area. So that steering group that they've set up is to inform and provide direction to the Priority One blueprint for the industrial area. We're hoping that blueprint will be available in the next 2 or 3 weeks and can be shared. But that blueprint is setting up actions that businesses see they could do to improve, I guess, how they operate within the industrial area. And then also we expect to see some challenges within that blueprint for local government to pick up on as well. So just up on the screen at the moment, during the phase 1 feedback, we heard a lot of the similar themes and concerns. There were 3 questions asked around the Mount Industrial area. In this case, what would you change about the industrial area? Those concerns, I think, have been reflected and very fairly summarised in the phase 2 engagement that's just concluded. So we are hearing consistent messaging coming through about what needs fixing. Next slide, please. Deliberately, look, I've put this up here because these are some of the headlines from the last couple of years. I know you'll be familiar with these. These headlines obviously illustrate that there are ongoing issues. We've seen improvements in air quality, but air quality remains probably one of the top 2 issues for the industrial area to address. Next slide. And then earlier this month, there was a Radio New Zealand feature, in terms of what it means to be affected by the industrial area. Now, next slide. The flip side of that is obviously all of the monitoring that the regional council undertakes, all of the monitoring that those businesses undertake and the improvements that they have been making. And we've seen in the Te Whatu Ora health report that was released at the end of July, particular improvements in PM10, which is the dust and very fine particles that come from a range of sources. So those come from transport, port operations, roading, and not just the industrial premises. What we are also seeing is some of those trends and some of those other contaminants potentially staying the same, decreasing or increasing. And I guess it's some of those other contaminants that are a concern and how they might impact on people's health. So the health study quite clearly set out those findings. And that's the challenge for the councils to respond to those. So I guess we're in a situation where businesses are saying, look, we're doing a good job. We think we are hearing what the community is saying. We are responding to that. We want to stay where we are. We want to coexist with the communities and with whareroa. And then the flip side, we're hearing that despite all of these improvements, there is still an impact on people's health, amenity and well-being. And so that's the challenge, is how do we find a way forward? Next slide. So through the stakeholder engagement that we undertook, so as well as the engagement around the Mount Arataki spatial plan, there was specific engagement that's been done for the industrial plan. 3 workshops have been held this year in March, May and August. And so at the first workshop, we just asked the stakeholders to identify what the issues and opportunities were and what their vision was for the area. The second workshop, we put forward those 3 scenarios at the bottom of the screen. So what would it look like if it was business as usual? What would it look like if there was expansion? So the resource consents that are currently before the Environment Court for the port, if those are granted, if the port sees a doubling of containers and export growth over the next 30 years, what does that look like? And then the third scenario was, well, what if we operate within environmental limits? So what if we change the current scenario and have stricter controls in place? What would that look like? So from there, we presented at the most recent workshop to stakeholders. We did land it cold with them and deliberately landed it cold and said, here is council's preferred scenario. It's a draft scenario for feedback. It includes some land use interventions and what do you think? And I guess that has been viewed both positively and negatively. I think some of the actions that have made their way into the Mount Arataki Spatial Plan are very well supported. Other actions are not. So mana whenua don't see that some of those actions go far enough around addressing air quality, while the businesses feel that some of those actions go too far. So that's currently what we are assessing and wishing to undertake and close out some of that engagement with both those groups.
So what was your preferred scenario?
Slide, please.
How did you decide that?
So the preferred scenario that's up on the screen and in the packs as part of attachment B was developed from, I guess, listening and responding to the issues and opportunities that we heard from all of the stakeholders. So that's where we've come up with a set of draft interventions. The ones that are the most, I guess, confrontational are suggesting land use change or some form of regulatory control around Whareroa and around Manganui Road. Manganui Road, I guess, is less controversial because of the commercial zoning and the proposal that we move perhaps to a light industrial zone, then into commercial and restrict residential developments that may occur. The Whareroa itself is where, I guess, the rubber hits the road in terms of if we're suggesting land use change, how might that operate with existing use rights? And I guess a range of options have been put forward. The language at the moment, as you see up on the screen in terms of the fourth line down, is looking at how would you implement a business hierarchy across the city, and then how would you specifically implement that for the Manganui or Mount Manganui industrial area. So that's suggesting potential for a plan change, and that's something I guess specifically we want to discuss today at the workshop. Just next slide, because we're just about at the end. So these are the specific land use interventions. I mentioned the need to look at our current business hierarchy across the city. At the moment, we have one industrial zone, one commercial zone. That doesn't necessarily provide for the range of land uses currently that occur, but also the range of land uses that you might want to see in future. We're also looking to our colleagues at Bay Plenty Regional Council in terms of how they might develop an airshed management plan for the Mount Manganui airshed. And they recently had a workshop in this room with their committee about a month ago, as well as potentially looking at other changes to their regional plan. So at the moment, they are implementing the Environment Court's direction around Plan Change 13, which is the air quality component of the regional plan. And then the other aspect of that is that Priority 1 are very keen to work with businesses to implement a voluntary environmental accord, which commits to certain improvements over time as well. So I think there's a range of actions that would see a positive benefit for the community for mana whenua if they were implemented. Next slide. So at the moment, there is the Mount Manganui polluted airshed that was declared a polluted airshed in November 2019 by the Ministry for the Environment. This is a management plan specific to the airshed that would see, I guess, a voluntary and regulatory mechanism implemented. So that could be quite an operational plan, or it could be a high level plan, but that's something that I perhaps invite Ruben just to comment on, because obviously it's regional council's role.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ruben Fraser, the GM for Regulatory Services here at Toi Moana. I think David's answered it really well. The only thing that I would add is that the interim decisions that we've had from the Environment Court in relation to PC 13 do provide some pretty strong direction to council for a few things to do. So there's an additional change to make for unsealed yards in that polluted airshed. And the action plan is another thing that they're strongly directing the council to pick up and do. The follow-on, once we've done those things, we'll be looking at whether we need a specific plan change for the Mount airshed. I think if you're betting, you'd say, yes, we will have to do that, and that will be plan change 18 once we've done those other couple of things.
Sorry, next slide, please. So specifically looking at land use change, we have had a look at what other councils and other plans may be doing, particularly those that are adopting the national planning standards that came out in 2019. And that's moving to, I guess, more nuanced zoning approaches and the difference of industrial zones, where you might have a general industrial zone or a heavy industrial or light industrial zone. What we've seen with the Auckland Unitary Plan is because they're a unitary authority, they're able to link their land use more tightly with their regional consenting requirements. So, for example, they have enabled the ongoing operations of heavy industrial activities, provided they also have corresponding regional consent. Now, just next slide. A lot to unpick here, but in the next slide, Wellington, who notified their plan and have recently had hearings in June and July, their approach was to keep with the one industrial zone, but to identify any heavy industrial activities as a discretionary activity. So in essence, those existing uses continue, but should there be a change to that use or a new use, then that would automatically trigger a resource consent process, which would ordinarily be publicly notified. And they've also defined heavy industrial activity, which means offensive or objectionable dust, odour, noise, etc., that may impact on people's health and safety. So there are a couple of examples that we can lead on. We're looking at potentially a bespoke approach. I think the key here is that our discussions with both mana whenua and with businesses is that we haven't landed on a way forward as such. We do have some ideas about how we think that should approach, but we're very keen on getting some input and support and direction around this table to move that forward before we take things formally back to you in December. And just last slide, please. So the idea is, what's subject to time, obviously we answer your questions, but we just work through that pack and that information that we provided to you. There's a lot in there, there's a lot to unpick, but very much appreciate any directional feedback that you may give.
We're really running out of time. Because that took over half an hour. I guess the first thing I just want to be clear in my head is where sea level rise comes in, because one of the undiscussed things in Whareroa is, and balance, is the fact that we've already got a pump in Whareroa, and the future of that as a place where people live might be more limited than people are talking about currently. And the same goes for balance, because they're on that same sort of level, if you like. So where does that come into this?
So within our overall interventions, we also have one that suggests that there should be, I guess, that climate change or a dynamic adaptive pathways type project or study undertaken for that area, which would look at both the Whareroa site and the adjoining industry where those impacts are. There are a number of, as well as sea level rise, there's coastal inundation, flooding as well, and there is also significant tsunami risk within the area affecting both industry and the marae. So we feel that study does need to be undertaken. That could take some time, and it also needs, I guess, involvement from all parties in a proactive manner. And to date, all parties that we've spoken to have sort of said, well, we haven't looked at that issue yet. We're aware of it, but they haven't moved forward with it. So I guess, where we're headed probably in terms of a recommendation is to, given that both parties have, or when I say both parties, both in terms of the discussions with Whareroa and business in that area, both have, I guess, stated that they intend to to be staying in that area, is that we do need to undertake that study with them, but in the meantime, we need to be looking at what is the appropriate land use within that area, such as that lighter industry at that interface.
These are some quite long-term decisions that we're making. And the reality is, particularly in that area, that looking at your preferred scenario, that's the key area that where we've got the greatest challenge. And the reality is they already flood. So, we can't be making enormous long-term decisions around something that might not be able to remain there. Because we're only giving life to an aspiration that might not be able to be achieved at enormous cost. And the same goes for balance. I mean, I just don't understand why they aren't addressing it either.
Yeah, and I think our current view, and we'll take away your feedback, but is that we do need to look at moving both pieces of work forward. The climate change process might show that there's a number of pathways there to consider, but we also need to move forward at looking at what is the right interface in terms of that land use, adjacent to Whareroa as well at the same time, because we could see new business establishing. In the meantime, there's still sites where heavy industry could establish themselves directly adjoining, which would also be of a concern, because I guess we need to take an approach that responds as far as we can now, as well as that longer term.
We have had that scare, haven't we, with the tanks? Wasn't there an application that was going in?
Yeah, the Timaru Oils application.
Okay, I mean, I understand that, but long term, there has to be a good understanding. I'm a bit worried because I think we've got a lot of information already. Surely we know the flooding, and we know we've just had the tsunami stuff. So, we could go on analysing this for years and years and years.
I agree. I think the information's there. We need to move forward with a climate change plan with the relevant parties all involved in that, and we'd support, that being a priority.
I would add, Chair, that conversations are happening and have happened with mana whenua around climate change adaptation and what that means with the Tauranga unit. I guess part of the importance of Whareroa is that it has been there for the last 160 odd years. And certainly the marae has been there in 3 different locations in the last 160 years. So that is the remaining land parcel that the hapu have. So it is significant regardless of whether it's underwater.
That's right, whether it's underwater. I mean, I'm not decrying the significance of it. I'm just concerned that there's some reality in the conversations about what the next 30 years might actually bring, so that everyone has the opportunity to think about it, and we get the opportunity to talk about what are the alternatives and how can we help. Bill.
Just and really picking up your point before, Anne, in terms of the previous application, in terms of oil company and that type of thing. And given seems to be a need for considerable further investigation, is there any opportunity for some type of interim controls to be put in place in that Mount Industrial area to potentially address some of those applications or potential applications that could be made that may be for heavy industry or whatever, while that other work has been undertaken? There's some type of interim arrangement pending the detail, or do we need to just get to the crux of the matter earlier?
I think the short answer is getting to the crux of the matter earlier. So if the committee's minded to I guess undertake some form of regulatory control, then the earlier a plan change is promoted, the better. Obviously that needs to go through the Schedule 1 process and needs to consider whether that is the best and most appropriate option. I think the other aspect is regional council with Plan Change 13 has quite a strong regulatory framework already around discharges to air. And one of the reasons the Timaru oil site was declined was because of the potential impacts on whareroa and the cultural importance of whareroa. So there is some teeth there. It's I guess that question of we could keep getting asked of what can Tauranga City Council do to address this issue? And then the flip side is how do we maintain the economic base of the Mount Industrial area and support the businesses that are still there?
So what is the status of this attachment C of all these projects? Because we went through this with the Otamotai spatial plan where there's a whole lot of stuff that the community puts in place and raises expectations that there's a whole lot of stuff that's going to happen, and then we find there's no money. We haven't had a close look at it, and etc.
Yeah, I can talk to that. So attachment A is shows a draft proposed program. Attachment C is effectively the description of each of those projects.
So I guess then, so this is what you're proposing and you want feedback back on, because I can tell you right here and now, if we're considering putting a cycleway on Hewlett's Road, we have to be joking. We have to be joking. It shouldn't make the list. Who in their right mind would ever want to cycle down a major state highway? Regardless of what happens at the Tortora Street, we don't have a cycleway on the TEL. It should be completely separate. So why would we even put it on a list?
Excuse me. It's on the list because
right between the eyes.
Yeah, no, it's good. So I'm talking internally with the teams. We understood that that the off-street network was off the cards, running closer to the airport boundary and past Whareroa for a number of reasons. I think some land and connection issues. So I'm happy to take that back to the team and have that discussion, because
it's just, look, the practicality of it is just, apart from the safety, there isn't enough room for cars and buses at the moment, let alone trying to make a safe cycleway. For heaven's sake, we're not going to buy land all the way up there. We'll have to go through the industrial area. They have to do something quite innovative, but you just can't do that. That's dumb.
And I'd say the community would have stronger support for an off-road cycleway during that.
Would.
So, yeah.
No one in their right mind would put a cycle. Well, I've seen a few of them. It's pretty low IQ, I'd have to say.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, because that's Action 13, which says a long or adjacent to Hewlett's Road, and we certainly did hear the feedback you gave us earlier in the year, and I know Carl and the team have been pushing for what would be that off-road access. And how might we create that? So it's a bit of a bob each way, but not suggesting we'll create a lovely, nice new access way down Hewlett's Road.
And we've spent a lot of money on the Tortora Street one, which is now starting to be used. We should be looking for a way through there, maybe through Blake Park. I mean, that was one of the things that we saw down in Saxon Field down in Nelson, where they used their big sports grounds as a park. And there were cycleways and walkways and areas for the public to be using, and that seems much more sensible to link in with some of those Mount cycleways than trying to put a cycleway down a major state highway. I drive my little Suzuki Swift down there, and I sit there in mornings with the wheels up to here on either side. I'd hate, at least I'm in a safe vehicle, reasonably safe. Wouldn't go well under the wheels. Bill.
Yeah, so I'm on that one there, which
Attachment A.
yes, which has a whole lot of things, both unfunded, funded, and I presume funded means committed in existing plans. What would be helpful though, is that I appreciate this shows the total bundle of works, but actually having that schedule in terms of, okay, there's stuff underway, but what the clear focus is in terms of any particular actions that arise out of the spatial plan that are new and are not part of what's already happening. Because you look at this list and you think, oh my God. But you'd probably half, I don't know, it might be close to 40% at least are already committed and funded. So it's really distilling what are the critical elements out of all that in respect of what's come out of the spatial plan. But then picking up the earlier comment, there will be funding challenges and how some of those things might be funded in partnership with others or whatever else, as opposed to it just being part of a TCC one.
Yeah, have to come back with a more refined program. I think you're correct. There's quite a lot in there that is already part of the existing Mount program, work program, and within our LTP. And then other aspects that we have as funded or partially funded are that we know that we can pull from various existing funding streams and so forth, but we can give more clarity on, I guess, what is specific arising out of the Mount Spatial Plan. Notwithstanding that, what we are trying to do through this Mount Spatial Plan is solidify in one place the entire program for the Mount going forward over the next 10 years. So put it
Yeah,
into
I
that
understand,
context.
so people can get a handle on the total, but actually having that more focused chart that actually this is an addition or not.
Again, I register my concern that I can see what we're funding. Well, I can see what we're funding, but there's an awful lot here that's being planned that isn't funded. I'm just really worried that we're just setting up this huge set of aspirations, like Autumn, and then we can't deliver. Now, if I look at one of, then it's, I guess it's a tangata whenua, it's got a yellow, so this is waterway restoration plan for the industrial areas. So this, when I look at the detail, this is finding some of the original streams, taking them out of what are currently stormwater drains and things and creating wetlands. Well, it's the middle of an industrial area. Really, we're going to spend a lot of money doing that? Or are we going to try and spend the money on, because it comes down to priorities. One of the things that the expressway, that the Mount to the Hewlett's Road study is talking about is joining up some of those internal roads in the industrial area so that people don't have to travel down Hewlett's Road. And so to me, that's a priority for funding rather than creating wetlands in the middle of our industrial area. You may want to have that when an area is being redeveloped and an industry is redeveloped, but to actually start doing that is a coming. So I guess my question is, where's the prioritisation of where that funding would go, and that's what takes me back to that first chart that I questioned about economic activity and economic well-being, and making sure that we're actually then looking at this chart of, which is to me is a wish list, and saying what's reasonable to be achieved that will achieve that objective that we think we can fund, and then how do we prioritize within that? And I just don't see that that's been done. I get the feeling
Sorry, but I think it has been done, and so maybe I'll just try to explain it. And I guess what we've done is we had a longer list of projects that came out of the design sprint and other processes. This is the whittled down version. So if you imagine all the ideas that get put on the table and so forth, what we've tried to do is provide clarity on what is funded, potentially partially unfunded, and unfunded. It is really around those unfunded that we need your help on making a decision whether there is any ability to fund or move forward or not. In terms of where that list sits, it does reflect the priorities, with the exception of, well, some of those mana whenua priorities would sit further up the list. But in terms of, say, the waterway restoration, that's why that pretty much sits at the bottom of the list, because in terms of value for money, available funding and... Oh, the very last one is the waterway restoration plan. There might be two relating to water. Yeah.
$3 on it and it's funded. And I don't remember ever having that discussion for the long-term plan.
It's in there twice.
Down the bottom, it's unfunded.
Yeah, sorry. Hopefully that's the only error there. But the line that you're looking at should have been replaced by the very bottom one, where we've moved it out to 10 years, stated that it is unfunded. Yeah, apologies.
Sorry, I think I know why it's in there twice. I think one was developing a plan. What could you realistically do and achieve? And then the second one was the implementation of that. I think...
Understand mana whenua aspirations. I mean, Te Manawa Te Wai is absolutely critical. But as we found with some of the city development, you can do a lot in your design with, what do you call them, stormwater gardens that collect stormwater. The rain gardens. And so through design, through development, we can actually start, when we do the planning changes, we can build some of that in. But so you can do it in different ways, is what I'm saying, to meet some of those aspirations.
Yeah, and we do have another action further up, which is around the landscape plan, but there is another one around those more business as usual improvements. Actually, it's over the page. So implement water sensitive urban design approach for stormwater treatment. So I guess the initial one that you've picked up about waterway restoration is the big chunky one that would cost a lot, and we have pushed that down in terms of priority because of the funding or unfunded. But also to your point, and yeah, we do have those, I guess, those quicker wins, those outcomes that we can achieve along the way with other projects as well as business as usual. I guess coming back to your original comments, it really is around, I guess we've pushed a lot of the unfunded further down the track on that list, because we would need to find a way to fund it. But what we are looking for from this group in particular is if there was something of importance that that felt council needs to be funding or looking for ways to push that up the list, we'd be looking for that as well.
One of them for me has to be the buffer, enhance the landscape buffer between both industry and whareroa and that Manganui Road. I mean, that is a classic. I don't know that the evidence shows it makes a big difference to air quality, but it certainly makes a difference to the look and the feel. But I see that's partially funded, I think.
Yes, as part of the going back when we were looking at long-term plan funding, we did create a number of buckets relating to the Mount. So there's potential to use some BAU funding there, potentially to use some of that funding as well. And probably the other area, just for awareness, that we thought would be important for that funding is to look at safety through environmental design for a number of the communities, some of that accessibility. So it wasn't an enormous amount of money, but I think we could potentially make some good use of it.
Sorry, just to add, Chair, I think some of the conversations we've had with the likes of Port Tauranga, Balance, Lauta, Hexion have been around what improvements they can make on their land. And so they're very keen. And in fact, both the Port and Hexion have some planting lined up that would assist in that amenity and overall appearance. So they're very keen to contribute towards that. And we're looking at potentially as part of the environmental accord, they might be able to put in some putia to actually do some of that work, whether it's on private or public realm space. So it is about what are the different kind of pots of money that we might be able to utilise and leverage off.
And we've certainly had some discussions with some industries that have made those offers. So we shouldn't be shy about taking them up on some of that, particularly in the public realm. I mean, we expect them to tidy up their private land, but to help with the whole industrial area. So what are you wanting from us?
Well, if you're bidding for projects, then I'll put my bid in, which is the industrial road network improvements. I think it's fundamental, very significant dollars and unfunded. But at the higher level, it seems to me that we're between a rock and a hard place. We've got a community who don't want industry there, basically. It sounds like that's a pretty broad view. And then we've got industry who don't want to move. And so we basically can't win either way. What we're trying to do is kind of do bits around the edge that might placate both parties, but probably we're going to end up with both parties being dissatisfied. I don't know, but I believe the significance of the industrial area to NZ Inc. and certainly to Tauranga would be very significant. It's a large part of our employment base. It's a large part of our economy. So on the one hand, I've got the urge to protect and preserve that economic base. On the other hand, as a part-time resident in the area where I do experience some of the, particularly for me, it's less particulates, but petrol or it's the fumes which presumably come from the tar seal and the various other tanks for petroleum, etc., around the place. And it's quite irregular, but very, very strong when it does exist. So I can certainly identify that those who live there on a long-term basis, the frustration that they're feeling that those issues aren't being addressed. And I was interested in the Wellington definition of industrial effects. It wasn't just health effects, it was actually things like odour, smell, visual intrusion, which are quite subjective, not requiring an evidential base that would qualify from an RMA point of view. So I'm just sort of wondering how valid those issues are in our context, because if you took that definition of the impact of industry, then you don't need much of an evidence base. You just need a whole bunch of people saying this is unacceptable, and you've got a problem. And then I go back. So I'm sorry to go on, but I then go back to the question I raised earlier in the meeting around, and touched on it, the availability of alternative industrial land. And I think we need to understand that, and we need to also understand how many of the existing use rights are due for expiry within the next, say, decade or so. What proportion of the industry is actually port dependent? Because they potentially might be able to go somewhere else if the land was cheap enough and the transport access was good enough. So there's a lot of the sort of information around how we might reconcile the problems that we don't have at our fingertips. And I think we need to have it at our fingertips, because at some stage we're going to have to grasp the nettle and have a conversation with the community and say, well, we hear your aspirations on improving air quality, but the reality is we can't deliver on it for 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever years. We may be able to over time, but it's a long term. You better get used to it. And or equally, we're going to have a hard conversation with the industry to say basically, well, your license to operate here is expiring, and you better figure out where the heck you're going to go and the timeline for that, because at some stage we're going to have to reconcile these two competing needs. And to me, the spatial plan touches on all of these issues, but doesn't address the core, really hard issues. And we are at risk, I think, of coming up with a an attempt to try and placate the parties that actually won't succeed for all the reasons I've just described. So that's where my head's at. I think it's key that we have those other pieces of information to inform the social plan, and I think we have to have those hard discussions with the community that we haven't yet broached. Because we haven't had access to that information. But if you want bids on priorities, yeah, fix up the transport local roads.
Gotta do that.
Yeah, we are.
Kia ora, I just support your comments that you've just mentioned, Stephen. The roading access in the industrial area, but also this problem, I was looking at it, it's, you pretty much have to pick a side, whether you go with whareroa or whether you go with industry. What is that? We've talked about, well, what about the impacts of climate change, sea level rising? Getting a report on climate adaptation and the effects on that area is really important. And maybe through that report, there'll be some mitigating factors on how that can be improved. Because if I think about some of the issues that whareroa are dealing with, and if we look at Wellington's definition, noise was in there, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got the airport, you've got the planes flying over, that's noise. So, are they, I know that they've jumped to their own solution, which is let's get rid of industry. But if industry can find a way to clean up their air quality, maybe there was technology to say that they don't pollute anymore, and then we had like electronic cars and buses and trucks and planes that don't make noise, and then we built their marae up, or they built their marae up on stilts, which got them away from that flooding era, but they can also see moa. There are ways around providing solutions to get them what they need, but I feel like that still won't be enough if all those different things came to pass. And then if we look at industry, they're looking for a place to operate which is close proximity to the port and having their existing use rights recognised, and looking at when those resource consents are coming up, they're still gonna have to apply for that anyway. And if they get declined on that, then what are they going to do? So, moving them, they haven't said they must stay there permanently. It's just a really good, they've got it good right now because they're so close to the port. So, again, just supporting what Stephen said, I just think if we did have more information, we're still going to end up with this trying to go with one or the other. And I don't know, it's kind of like, well, let's go with what's going to bring in the most money, but the health and safety of our people within our community are the ones that are going to suffer. And that's probably not a decision that I'd be happy to support or make. So really trying to find some alternatives, to support, to try and, I reckon we will probably need to look at not maintaining that income. That probably would be something that would need to look at. But again, a discussion that would need to have. That's me. Oh, the other thing I wanted to raise, and it's not really raised in here, but it's something that came across the news, not the main news, obviously, Māori news, was around rubbish bins and how there were vandalism in the Mount area around Te Reo Māori, and whether that's something that gets addressed here, or is that a police issue? Or, because if we're trying to support mā Tauranga Māori histories, Te Reo Māori, then how are we addressing that? Are we just going to keep putting Te Reo Māori words back on the rubbish bins in the Mount area? Kia ora.
I actually spoke on quite a lot of news outlets about it. There are about 40 bins. It wasn't just in one particular area. And yes, we did refer it to the police. So, and they are repainting them. So, yep, they might paint them out, but we'll put them back. But it is a police issue, and we did refer it to the police, and we did call it out as racist quite strongly. Shad. And then we've got 3 minutes, and then I think 3:30, we're going to have to call a halt.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate all the work that's gone on and the conversations that have been had, particularly with industry and community and mana whenua. And this is a tough challenge, trying to manage all of those various competing interests, values, to try and satisfy everybody. I mean, it's a challenge for us to try and navigate that. In the back of my mind, particularly for the Mount Industrial area, it's 70 odd years of development right from when the port went in. So this thing hasn't just happened overnight. It's taken a long time to get where we are. And actually the solutions are going to take us a long time to work through. Appreciate the short-term interventions, the medium and then the long term, but working with community to understand actually what's our vision for the Mount, what's our vision for the Mount Industrial area, what's our vision with working with industry and with community, and then working through some of those short, medium and long-term interventions. But then also with mana whenua, their history goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. Well, our history goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. And that won't change. So regardless of what's there, whether they're still living there in 100 years' time, that history will still remain. And in a way, how do we protect and maintain those relationships and connections to those areas of importance for the community, whether that's mana whenua, whether that's the residential, the Mount community, but also the industry and business. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot in here. I mean, I appreciate all of the interventions that and it's something that we need to work through, and the report back, I think. But yeah, just really wanted to acknowledge, I suppose, the work that's been done, but also the ongoing work beyond finalising the spatial plan and then implementing and delivering on those actions.
Quickly, not good because I am tired and I want to get it out. Looks like totally everything Shad just touched on the points, taken a long time to get here. I've remained unconvinced for some years now that we are getting bang for buck from the port and the industrial zone. I challenged the last council to be brave in the sense that get long term. Where are we heading in 30 years? I'd love to see it be brave. That conflict has always been there and it always will be. But where someone has to show leadership in that space. Me personally, if I had a long-term plan, it's to phase out light industry at maximum, most in there, all heavies out. We start to soften the area. I'd potentially love to see it not there. I know that's a hard one, but having said that, now I have jumped on a plane and up to Port Moresby. Perfect example where they said for decades, we couldn't survive without the port. The port is gone. The city has thrived because when you get rid of that industrial component, naturally something goes in there. And that was shops and restaurants and cafes, and the waterfront is just buzzing and alive. There's now tourists, believe it or not, going to Papua New Guinea. And so it's a thriving mecca where they said you couldn't swap out one for other. So I remain unconvinced. I know for New Zealand Inc. it's big. Where's all of the help been coming from central government and the rest of the country to have this thing in our backyard? They're not paying for it. They don't live with it. They don't sit in a Suzuki Swift being crushed by trucks left to right and centre. So I'd love to see some leadership in that, a big phase out. And I look, in all due respect, I know we're doing really well. I can see but it's like this paper, like you're clipping away, just trying to paper over things. The yards are going to hard top the yards and keep it. It's just always piecemeal and trying to chip away. I'd love to see some real direction change. And it's just to set it, not to say that successive councils might not overturn it, but boy, give it some really strong direction. So get ready for that conversation at our next.
Okay. Just as well, it was short. So just one last question. Just looking at your scenario, I got a bit confused with your pink areas, where you describe them as on the map as the commercial zone, but in your draft interventions, you've got a plan change to restrict residential areas in commercial zone areas, and then we've got plan change 33 with high density right alongside. So the question I have is, are you saying that we are in conflict? So this developing scenario is actually in conflict with plan change 33. And are the pink areas commercial areas, or are they commercially zoned, or are they where you want to restrict residential area and keep them as commercial zoned? Two questions.
Yeah, so Chair, so the pink area shown is the current commercial zone. The intention is to restrict residential activities within that part of the commercial zone that interfaces with Manganui Road. So that's why there's the two different actions. So it's not to change the commercial zone anywhere else, and it has nothing to do with Plan Change 33. What we've seen is that I think a recent report that went to Bay Plenty Regional Council, and certainly in the Te Whatu Ora Health Report, has shown there's about 200 people at least living in the industrial area. Some of that is the Whareroa residents, but also people living in the airport hangars. And there's some work that Sarah's team are doing looking at exactly which activities are consented and which are not. So currently under the city plan, it's commercial zoned, and therefore you're permitted more or less to have residential activity. What we don't want to see is residential activity within the industrial area. So the intent is to kind of close off that opportunity that may arise, for example, in future, and then put more people in close proximity to where some of those heavy industries are located.
Okay. Okay, so given that we've got to finish now, because we've still got other stuff to do, what do you want us to do now? Because actually, we've probably spent more time asking questions and getting our heads around these papers. Do you want us to give you feedback?
Yeah, look, we're definitely looking for feedback. So if the appropriate way is to, to provide a week or so for that feedback and collate that somehow. I'm not too sure how you usually do it outside of this through Sarah or someone. But yeah, we definitely want to receive that feedback so that any of the commentary coming we can be updating and refining the material before the 4th of December. I think we're also hearing clearly, we need that story that we bring forward on that day to be really coherent. I think a lot of the information you're asking about is there, and we have it close to hand. Notwithstanding, we're probably also to just a number of the points made, that we're not going to please everyone within this, but what we want to bring you is a planning solution that is best practice or does represent best practice and provides what we feel is the right planning way forward for the wider community into the future.
So, I mean, from the Commissioner's point of view, we can go through the papers, we can find a time to go through those papers, and I'm just not sure about our mana whenua reps.
So I was just going to ask, so specifically, did you want feedback on the interventions directly, or a range of things in those papers?
I guess there's a number of aspects. I'm happy to provide an email or something, but the program, and particularly if there was anything on there that you felt doesn't need to be on there or should be pushed down, but if there might see also things that aren't funded, and does there need to be a conversation around that in those interventions. But I think also specifically on David's mahi in relation to the recommendations for the industrial area that are being proposed.
Yeah, appreciate you haven't had the detail as well. So we've kind of landed this all on you. A lot of information to sift through and think about. So we do want to give you that time to have a think. If there are any questions, we're more than happy to have another sit down or korero. Otherwise, keen on getting your tick of approval. And if we don't get the tick of approval, those things that you'd like us to change or reprioritise.
So you can convene a session with your members, and then we'll put the two together and send them off. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Did you want to have the last word, Sarah? All right. Look, thank you well, there's only two of you left, but thank you very much. Appreciate you staying on and working through this. I tend to agree with Wahario. I think it's almost impossible, isn't it? It's almost like the wisdom of Solomon. But we have a responsibility to come up with best practice and what's in the best interests of the residents of Tauranga. So that's everybody included.